Here's today's First Word Daily Devotion.
We enter the Judges on April the 27th, and remember this, Judges is a very violent book. In some cases, it's going to be difficult to read. And what I mean by difficult is just frustrating in the fact that you see the theme of the book of Judges at the very end of the book. There was no king in the land of Israel. The people did what was right in their own eyes. And if we don't lose sight of that, we'll lose our place entirely in the narrative, because it really looks as if sin is having its full effect in Judges, as we see people doing, not according to the commandment of the Lord, but living just as they please. And of course, the consequences are severe. So Judges 1 puts us in the timeline. We continue the timeline, and the timeline is important because we realize that as we read the Bible, the timeline is reaching the fullness of time, which will be when we get into the birth of Jesus. That's what Paul says in Galatians. In the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born of a virgin, born to redeem those under the law, as He Himself was born under the law. Judges 1:1, after the death of Joshua. So again, this puts us in the timeline of continuing the story. And remember what the story is. Don't lose sight of this either as we encounter the book of Judges. The story is a story of the steadfast love of God. It's a story of salvation. It's a story of redemption. But it's also a story that involves sin, and we see sin's great effect in the book of Judges. It's almost like a fragmentation grenade went off, and all of the consequences of sin has inhabited every square inch of the world. And in the midst of that broken world, we have the promise of redemption, the promise of a Savior. So after the death of Joshua, and then look who we see right away. Verse 2, the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Now, we see Judah right away. That tells us a little bit about the promise that is coming. Remember the poem back in Genesis? Remember the blessing of the sons of Israel? Who is it that received the blessing? The highest blessing of a scepter, the highest blessing of a king, and that is, of course, Judah. Even though he wasn't the firstborn son, he receives the blessing. And so here's what I mean, a little bit of this violence. Then Judah went up to the Lord, gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hands, and they defeated 10,000 of them at Bezek. They found Adoni-Bezek at Bezek, and fought against him, and defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they pursued him, caught him, cut off his thumbs and his big toes. And Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. And remember the theme of the book of Judges. We turn over the page to verse 19, and we see the failures of the tribes, as well as the consequences of that failure. Verse 19, the Lord was with Judah. He took possession of the hill country, and here's the failure. But he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. Now the story is going to unfold from there in Judges, but let's turn to our New Testament reading. Let's turn to consider our Savior in John chapter 6. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is at the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Passover feast of the Jews was at hand. Lifting up his eyes, seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? And of course, here is this miraculous sign of the feeding of the 5,000. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, there's a boy with 5 barley loaves, 2 fish, but what are they for so many? Now Jesus had the people sit down in the place because there was much grass. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish. Now here's the key. As much as they wanted. And here we have here's how they perceive him in verse 14. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this indeed is the prophet who is come into the world. Remember, the Samaritans, they had a certain perception of Jesus. They said this is the Savior of the world, but this crowd says that he is the prophet who has come into the world. Now look at this. Perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force and to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, started across the Sea of Capernaum. It was dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind had blown. When they had rowed about 3 and 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea. And coming near the boat, they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." And then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. So here this Jesus is not only walking over the sea, but able to transport them safely through the waters. And he'll do the same for us. Now, turn over real quick to Psalm 107, and you see a pattern developing as we encounter these latter Psalms or these midway Psalms, and that is the pattern of praise. Oh, give thanks to the Lord. He is good. His steadfast love endures forever. Look at verse 8. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love. And then verse 21, let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love. And look at verse 20. He sent out his word and healed them and delivered them from their destruction. So what is it that heals? Well, it's the word of the Lord. Why do we read the Bible every day? Because every day we need daily healing.